I guess they got their giggle box turned over. Well, let's talk about the sheepskin. Since there's not so many people in here now, I might can make some off-color comments. Here's Odine. All right, sheepskin. This story is about Jack and his daddy. They lived back up in the mountains there in a little log cabin, and they was fine builders. They built houses and cabins for people. I wonder if they were Mennonites. That's just a joke. Nobody get upset. Don't get your mustaches all twisted up there. They built houses and cabins for people. What's wrong with y'all? They gonna get me tickled. One day Jack was getting up pretty old, and Jack's daddy gave him a sheepskin. His daddy said, "Jack, I want you to take this sheepskin into town and sell it, and bring the money back, and bring the sheepskin back." I ain't sure how he's going to do that. I guess we'll find out if we read the story. His daddy said, "Jack, I want you to take this sheepskin into town and sell it, and bring the money back, and bring the sheepskin back." And the next morning, Jack got that old sheepskin. He went into town dragging it behind him, and he got into town, and everybody wanted to buy the sheepskin, but they didn't want to pay him for it and give it back to him. That makes sense. Jack come home that evening. He was about gived out, and he said, "Daddy, I can't find nobody in the town that'd buy a sheepskin and pay me for it and give it back to me." His daddy said, "Son, you go back tomorrow and try again." The next morning, here went Jack down the road, dragging that old sheepskin. Went to town. Everybody he'd meet, "Y'all want to buy a sheepskin?" "Yeah, we'll buy it." "Well, I want the money, and I want the sheepskin back." They thought he was crazy. They said, "Can't do that." And Jack come home that evening and said, "Daddy, I just can't find nobody that wants to buy this sheepskin. Give me the money, and then give me the sheepskin back." His daddy said, "Son, go try one more time." His dad, I already read that line. The next morning, Jack went into town dragging that old sheepskin with him. Everybody he asked said, "Yeah, we'll buy the sheepskin, but we ain't giving it back to you." Well, Jack started home. He was out of heart, about to give up, and he come to an old bridge, and he sat on the bridge there looking awful sad. In a few minutes, he heard somebody holler, "You're looking awful sad. What's wrong with you?" He looked off the bridge. There in that creek was a young woman down there washing her clothes. And Jack said to her, "Daddy want me to sell this sheepskin, get the money, and bring the sheepskin back too, and I can't do it." She said, "Bring it on down here." Well, Jack took that sheepskin down there, and that woman washed it real good. She cut the wool off in the sheepskin and gave the sheepskin back and paid him for the wool. So he got the money and the sheepskin back. He went home and said, "Daddy, skin, got it back and got the money for it too." He told his daddy what happened. His daddy said, "Well, son, that woman seemed like she might make you a good wife." He said, "Go back and invite her for supper for over here." Jack went over and she said, "Yeah, I'll be over to eat with you." Well, that woman come over that evening, and they were sitting there eating supper, and her and Jack got to talking, finally got to courting. It wasn't long and her and Jack got married. Well, they was living with his daddy, and the king got word that Jack and his daddy was good builders. Word of them Mennonites gets around. Jack and the old, let me back up. The old, I'm sorry, I got some interference from the peanut gallery over there. Where were we? Well, they was living with his daddy. The king got word that Jack and his daddy was good builders. Like the Mennonites around here. Unless you're Daniel Miller, then you're a concrete man. Still do a good job. The old king sent Jack and his daddy the word to come and build him a castle. He said, I want the finest castle ever built. Like no other king had a castle built like that. So Jack and his daddy got what tools they had together and started down the road to the king's place. They got down the road a little piece, and his daddy said, Jack, make this road shorter for me. Jack said, I don't know what you're talking about. Did y'all see that? His daddy said, well, just go on back home. I don't need you. Jack went back home. His head hung down low, and his wife said, what's wrong? Well, Daddy said to make the road shorter for him, and I didn't know what he was talking about. She said, you silly thing, tell him a tale. Kind of like what we're doing here tonight. That'd make the road shorter. So Jack run and caught up with his daddy and started telling him a tale. When he got done with the tale, they was plumb at the king's house. It had made the road shorter. Well, when they got to the king's house, they started into building the king a castle. They worked and worked for months building that king a castle. When they got it done, it was the prettiest castle ever built in the world. Here's a picture of it. I guess a fair-looking castle, maybe compared to the Biltmore house up the road here. There's Jack. We was just talking about you, Jack. Not really. Not really. All right, so next, page 97. Jack and his daddy was going home the next day, and they was staying in a room there, and this man come to them. He worked for the king. The man said, the king again. He said, the king ain't going, great day. I can't even read this mountain talk. The man said, the king ain't gonna let yuns go home. He's gonna kill you. Jack's daddy said, why? Well, he don't want you to go out and build another castle this pretty for any other king. He's gonna kill yuns tomorrow, so you can't do it. So the next morning, the king come in the room where Jack and his daddy was. The king said, is this castle finished? Jack's daddy said, we got one more thing we need to do, but we left the special tool at home that we need to do with it. He said, I'll send Jack after it. The king said, no. I'll send my son after it. And the king didn't have but one son. The king's son said, what do you need? Jack's daddy said, well, just tell Jack's wife we need the straight and narrow tool. What if they're talking about the Bible? Well, just tell the Jack's wife we need the straight and the narrow tool. The king's son said, the straight and the narrow? Jack's daddy said, yep, but she'll know what you're talking about. The king's son, the only one he had, went to Jack's house and knocked on the door, and Jack's wife opened the door. He said, I'm the king's son, and the king sent me after a special tool Jack and his daddy need, called the straight and the narrow. Jack's wife knowed right then that this was the word Jack and his daddy used when they was in danger. Now see, mountain folk, they had code words too, plans. I bet they had a rally point and all that. She knowed they was in trouble. She said, it's over there in that chest. And she opened up that chest and said, I can't reach it. She said, you're going to have to reach down in there and get it for me. So the king's son went over there to reach down into the chest, and she grabbed him and throwed him in the chest and shut him up and locked him in there. And she sent word back to the king, if anything happens to Jack and his daddy, you'll never see your son again. Yeah, it didn't put that part in there, but anyway. There's 10. The only son the king had, boy, the king got scared and turned Jack and his daddy loose. Jack and his daddy come home, and Jack's wife turned the king's sons loose, let him go back home. Jack and his daddy was so happy that Jack's wife saved their life. So Jack and his daddy built her the finest castle that was ever built. It was bigger and prettier and better than the one they had built for the king. Prettiest castle in the whole world, nay, the whole universe. As far as I know, Jack and his daddy and his wife are still living in it. How about that? All right, here's April Burgess. She says, I'm having to read through my bifocals. That's what happens when you get old. And we'll finish our riddle here in a second. She says, special request. Isn't that a cat food? A special request of cat food? All right, I got agreement from the back. You should read I'll Love You Forever one day. Is that about the raccoon and its mama and scratching something? Anyway, I love that story, but I can never read it without crying. So you're going to make me read a tearjerker live on the web and see if you can get the big guy to cry. Challenge accepted. So anyway, at the last of our story there was a riddle. It said, it has a tongue. You can lead it to water, but it won't drink. What is it? A wagon. Wagon has a tongue. You can lead it to water. It won't drink. There you go. So I almost said it. I'm learning from those push-ups. I didn't say anyway, and that one doesn't count. So the footnote to this story is, and I'm not sure how it ties into this story. Missy says we have that book. Anyway, I'll give you 5 for that since I caught myself saying it. The footnote at the end of this story says, if you're going to tell a lie, I'm sorry. Let me back up. That was my mind reading ahead. The footnote says, if you're going to tell it big. There you go. The end, with unicorns and all that. Good night, everybody. We'll try this again tomorrow.